If you've been interested in Toon Boom Harmony, you may have encountered its most infamous reputation for not being user-friendly. I disagree. I think some people just get tripped up because it looks a lot like other programs, but it doesn't quite work like them. Also, the program's big. Many want to learn everything there is, but in reality there are just many different ways to use it. So many, in fact, that I've never seen any two people, companies, or productions use it in quite the same way. Therefore, a one-size-fits-all tutorial isn't really the way to go. What's more important, I believe, is helping you understand the way that you want to use it. Which features are you going to be using, and which ones will you find most important? Most people who use Toon Boom Harmony will finally experience a light bulb moment where things suddenly start to make sense. I'm going to try and provide that moment today by explaining the core fundamental mechanics of how this program works and how everything branches off from here. Then you should be able to figure out a lot for yourself without tearing your hair out. The first thing to understand is modern 2D animation is a spectrum, with traditional or frame by frame on one end and computer generated tween movement on the other. Frame by frame is where you physically draw one image after the other, and tweens are where the computer generates movement between 2 points. There are lots of programs that specialize in one extreme of this spectrum or the other, and they do that very well. Likewise, there are others that incorporate both ends. However, an individual's workflow will usually tend to fall to one side or the other. What sets Harmony apart is its ability to be anywhere and everywhere along this line. Its ability to combine the two techniques in nearly countless ways to create animations that not only look good, but they don't break the bank or the schedule in order to pull it off. With that in mind, what does every workflow have in common? This is the spine of what makes up Toon Boom Harmony. Now, it's normal to look at this and go, "What?" Especially if you're just wanting to start drawing. So let's get you to the point where you can look at this thing and go, alright. First we'll race through the whole thing, and the rest of the video will be about breaking it all down. So buckle up. When you draw, the program creates containers called drawings. The bits that artwork goes into. Each one of these drawing containers goes together in a folder called an element. The element is connected to the timing column. The timing column tells the element which drawings to show, how long to show them for, and in what order. The timing column is connected to the actual layer, the thing that you see, reorder, and stack in the timeline. The layer is the thing that holds everything together. A layer is connected to a bunch of parameters. Things like position, scale, rotation, special effects, these are all considered parameters. And finally, each parameter can be connected to a function, which tells a parameter to do something over a period of time, like making a rotation spin, for example. Interestingly, this entire chain is almost completely invisible to the end user. Isn't that fun? It's completely fine and normal if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all of that, because having these things hidden away can actually make our lives a lot easier. After all, you're an animator. You want to keep drawing and making life happen, not worrying about numbers and calculations and things. So instead, you're provided a number of tools to manipulate these core mechanics in a much more friendly way. We're going to work through each of those right now, and I'll demonstrate how things are being affected in the spine as we go. The 4 main tools you'll be working with are frames, drawings, exposure, and keyframes. Frames. Frames are simply just units on the timeline. This is frame 1, this is frame 10, this is frame 35. Seems pretty obvious, but my point is what they are not. Frames are not your drawings. They are not movement, they are not keyframes, and they are not exposures. They are simply units in time, nothing more. I emphasize this, say, for Flash users, where a keyframe signifies pretty much everything. You know, it's a new drawing, it's a new position of movement, it's where you'd swap out one symbol for another. And if you are one of those people, I encourage you at this point to try and separate all of those different elements in your mind, as they will now be different features that can be interacted with separately from one another. On the keyboard, use the lesser than, greater than keys to navigate one frame at a time. Drawings. When a new layer gets created, it has nothing else attached to it. If you begin drawing into an empty frame, the layer will generate its own timing column, its own element folder, and the first drawing contained within that element folder. This first little block here on the first frame, this is what represents a drawing exposure. Exposure, not yet, and is saved into an element folder with an ID number. Every drawing ID can be summoned from the layer's element and used again and again. Rather than scribbling into blank frames, it can be good practice to first press the new drawing button. That will give you a fresh, empty block, a new drawing container that's attached to the layers element, but with no new artwork inside that drawing container yet. It makes it just a bit easier to visualize and keep track of everything when you're first getting used to things. The library window has a slider in it. It shows you all the drawings available inside that layers element. Interestingly, drawings are named in the order that they're drawn, not in the order of the frames that they are made on. This, however, can be amended in preferences to cause drawings to be named after the frame that they are drawn on. So in this case, here's drawing 3, and it's on frame 7. Drawing 5 is on frame 4, etc. Drawings, however, can be renamed and they appear in the library in alphabetical order, so you can name them anything. Also, if you're using Harmony 16 or above, you should also have access to the drawing substitutions window, which will show you all the same drawings but now in a thumbnail view. The open and close square brackets on the keyboard will scrub through the library slider, allowing you to quickly summon different drawings when needed. Every layer contains its own element, so all of the drawings that you make for it will be unique to that layer. This means that 2 different layers can each have their own drawings named Drawing 1, because they're contained within their own independent element folders and are kept separate. Imagine for a moment the possibilities this system opens up to you. Drawings can be reused, recycled, and shuffled about. Loops, ping-pongs, store collections of assets like mouths and hands. Each time a drawing appears is simply a reference back to its file in the layers element library. Therefore, if a drawing is changed in any way, every instance of this drawing will be updated. It's like Flash's symbols, but on an image-by-image basis, giving you a lot more control. Now consider, if you wish to make a duplicate of a drawing that you can change without accidentally affecting the original, how could that be done? Next to the new drawing button, there is a duplicate drawing button. This takes the same artwork and assigns it a new drawing ID. And you can see here another instance in the library and the substitutions appears. The other method is quite interesting. Taking the black arrow selection tool, copying the artwork and then pasting it into a new empty drawing. Do you see how that's the same action? Remember, the drawing number is the container. It doesn't care about what's inside. If the vector artwork is the same, a little bit different, or totally different, it's the ID that matters. This overcomes a curious roadblock for many newcomers, as copying and pasting a drawing block from its frame in the timeline is pasting the drawing container itself. It will have the same ID, and therefore edit the original. Copying and pasting the artwork on the stage or the frames themselves, it seems like an interchangeable method. It's understandable how people would do either or both without thinking, but now you can see why in reality they are radically different methods. Finally, because each new layer generates its own element library and timing column, all of these parts can be treated separately from one another and shared around. This means duplicating a layer copies it and generates a new element and timing column that just look like the original. So everything can be changed inside without affecting the old one. However, cloning a layer, that makes a new layer, but it's linked to the same element and therefore sharing all the same drawings. You can, however, clone it to have a unique timing column, so you can use those same drawings and animate them in a different order. Or if things aren't crazy enough, you can clone the layer to be linked to the elements folder and the timing column as well. Two layers that share the same element library and the timing column will always mirror each other perfectly. Lastly, one can right-click on two different layers and choose to sync just the timing columns. So then you can have two completely different sets of drawings that will always animate together. That, so long as they have drawings that share the same ID numbers, will always animate alongside one another. Have a think about all the different ways you could use these connections to your advantage. Exposure. Every time a drawing is being shown on the timeline is called an exposure. Exposure represents how many frames any drawing is being seen for and is the main way that you interact with the timing column. One drawing may appear for a single frame while the next appears for 3. Messing with the exposures allows for a lot of animation flexibility, like increasing and decreasing speed mid-movement, lip syncing, rig-based animation built from many components, creating different kinds of loops, etc. The handy hotkeys addition and subtraction will push and pull the entire timeline on that layer, so you can quickly experiment with different timing. Or you can even press Command 1, 2, or 3 to set the exposure to that length for all the selected drawing exposures, and Command 4 will just let you put in any number. Now, consider here for a moment what's really happening if I delete all the frames along this timeline. Remember that they are not frames. I'm just deleting exposures. all of the drawings will remain inside the element library waiting to be exposed again. To permanently delete something, there is a right-click delete drawing option, or you can take all of the drawings that you want to keep and paste them into a new blank layer. Realize that this layer is given a new element with all of these drawings for the first time. In the same vein, if you copy a drawing container that is named 1 to a layer that already has a drawing named 1, all you're going to be doing is pasting an exposure. The program simply sees that you're pasting drawing 1, so it will show you whatever that layer has registered as drawing 1. Fortunately, merging layers is very reliable, so it must be taking the raw vector art and pasting it on the layer below, so ID similarities don't get in the way. Use the lesser than greater than keys while holding shift to navigate the timeline one drawing at a time, skipping long exposures. Keyframes. So far, we've been looking mostly at the left end of the spectrum, drawing management. Now we shift to the right, animation management, everything that is tween based. Even if you are a faithful traditionalist, I recommend understanding what all this is about. It could be very handy. So up until now, we've been using the drawing type tools. Particularly, there's this black arrow here that highlights your artwork orange and you can move pieces of it around. This is for editing the drawings themselves, the vector art. Think of it like you have a piece of paper in front of you and you're moving the image around somewhere on that page. This is not how tween animation is done. What we're after here is something that will take the piece of paper in its entirety and move that around. That's where the transform tool comes into play. This thing is built for manipulating a layer for animation purposes. Although it looks like it's doing the same thing because you can use both tools for squashing an image and moving them around, and the transform tool looks exactly the same as like the Photoshop one, it is very misleading, so please keep this in mind that the black arrow is for drawing management, the transform tool is for animation management. If you're just making simple corrections to your drawing and you use the transformation tool to do it, you're not actually changing the vector art itself here. Now, moving things with the transform tool creates a keyframe, indicated by this dot that appears on the frame, and if you do the same somewhere else, the program will connect the two dots together in a line and gracefully motion tween them together. Remember that the term keyframe is referred to this specific digital type of movement. Like most other compositing and editing softwares like After Effects, Premiere, or Maya, traditional paper-based keyframes, they're called key drawings now. Keyframes and motion tweens on the surface look kind of plain, but they have an extensive use, such as special effects, layer hierarchy, 3D depth, and puppeteering entire character rigs. And when used subtly to complement traditional style animation, it's a fast way to give things that little extra kick. What's going on in the background is when you're moving something around with the transform tool, you're really manipulating a layer's parameters. A drawing layer contains parameters like position, scale, rotation, skew. And whenever you manipulate a layer around in any way, these numbers are going to be fluctuating away. And as soon as any keyframe has been created, these parameters have now generated and attached to themselves a new function. A function is the calculation behind a tweened movement that causes it to gradually change from this number to this number. The line itself is what could be seen as the function, and the word could be used interchangeably with motion tween. Have a look here in the layer properties window and you'll see the parameters and their current value. As soon as a keyframe has been added to the layer, the numbers get grayed out. That's because before a parameter's number was universal across the entire layer. But now it's a function, so it has to hold all of the numbers that it will be throughout all of its movements. Even if I delete all the keyframes now, you'll notice that those numbers stay grayed out because the functions still exist, they're just blank now. It can be a bit of a point of no return because it means that rather than just being a static layer, it's now an animation layer. However, there is a video, and you should see its card there, where I go into all the ridiculous mathematical depth that functions have. We can perform all sorts of bonkers stuff that the everyday animator shouldn't need to worry about. But for now, what is important to understand is how this affects cloning and duplication. As before, duplicating a layer creates a new version of everything. New functions based on the originals, but can be changed and are not connected to any other layer. When you clone a layer with timing, it will take everything that is currently animatable. The element, the drawings, the timing column, and any functions that have already been created will be linked together with what it has been cloned from. It's a bit weird considering that parameters and functions are not the same thing. The reason for this is that any parameter without a function will not be linked when cloned. When there is no function attached to a parameter, that number is universal across the entire scene. This object now has a scale of 2 going down the entire timeline. As a function, however, this object has a scale of 2 until it has been told to become something else via its keyframes. Notice on this example I haven't added any keyframes yet, and when I clone the two layers, their tween movements remain separate from one another, simply because their parameters were not given functions until after they were cloned. Like the add drawing and duplicate drawing buttons, it can be good practice to get used to pressing the new keyframe button before making any adjustments. Interacting with parameters and layers themselves works on a system of what is visible. If you add a keyframe to a layer or even a group of layers that is collapsed, the action will be applied to everything inside. So consider opening sets of layers with the arrows or cracking open layers themselves with the plus symbol if you wish to add keyframes to specific components, parameters, what have you. It may also take a little practice to get used to this one, but this is a wonderful feature. I navigate between these methods all the time. Selecting an object on the stage with the transform tool and then pressing the O key will zoom to the layer in question, and then pressing O repeatedly will expand or collapse the hierarchy of that piece. Functions can have their speed up and slow down influenced. Adjusted by this box on the top left of the timeline, this is the quickest and easiest method for now. Again, the functions video I mentioned, it goes into all the nitty gritty of how you can get just a stupid amount of control out of your easing. If you don't want your keyframes to automatically tween together at all, the stop motion button here will break the movement between them. Now all this time we've had the drawings and the keyframes together on one layer. It gets a bit messy to work with over time. I suggest newcomers stick with pegs as much as possible. Pegs are just like drawing layers, only you cannot put drawings in them. They're exclusively for keyframe based stuff. It keeps things visually separate, so it is cleaner and it provides a lot more room for parenting. Several drawing layers inside one peg will all move together, or you can daisy chain pegs within peg to create a hierarchy for all sorts of things, like puppets for example. This is similar to AnimateCC's method of putting symbols inside symbols, but here everything is on the surface level. So you can do things like have drawing exposures swap mid-tween, or you can temporarily turn certain pegs off so you can focus in on your drawings without having it slide all about. Pegs could be used to store movements, to copy and paste into different places. Adding another peg to the chain is a useful way of moving a whole layer or group in a non-destructive way. Turning that peg layer off and on will enable or disable that permanent movement. And the flexibility and variety of what you can do with pegs is so absolutely limitless, I'll probably never see all the different ways it can be done. And with that, we are done. Hopefully now you can see the potential of the animation spectrum I showed off at the start, like character rigs that can have parts swap out whenever needed, traditional characters that have a little extra pop, complicated contraptions, and whatever else you can think of. Consider watching the Spine of Harmony breakdown that was near the beginning again, and see now if everything is starting to make just a bit more sense. I do hope you can see now how all these different methods could be executed. And even then, we are still just scratching the surface. I wonder, with these fundamentals, what new ways to animate you will be able to imagine. Regular viewers may notice that I haven't uploaded much this year at all. This video has in fact been getting chipped away on ever since December 2018 and took until November 2019. Turned out to be nearly 2 months worth of full-time work pulled and salvaged from gaps between other jobs. YouTube and tutorial making has always been a hobby. Unfortunately, it can almost never be prioritized. If you'd like to see uploads with more finesse like this one and uploaded much more frequently, let's give Patreon a cracker. Being real, there's a few times where I've had to consider retiring the channel, and without any kind of funding, I may have to do so. So, any help of course is not only greatly appreciated, but it will keep this channel running. Of course, the more it receives, the more of a focus it can have. Many have suggested Skillshare or Udemy or whatever, but personally I think these tutorials are important to be free and available for everyone to see. Toon Boom Harmony is not a cheap program after all. Many of you have probably forked out in order to get hold of this thing. I don't think you should be spending even more to get hold of lessons on just figuring out how to use the thing. But with the generous donations of a few, it means those who are in need of these lessons but are unable to afford them themselves, they get hold of these lessons as well. And that will be really cool. Thank you very much for your support over the years, and fingers crossed I'll be able to continue.